Come on, Zoom. All right, guys, I think we're now live. I want to welcome everybody. This is Bernard Nomberg, David Nomberg with Nomberg Law Firm, and Mike Gruber up in New York. And this is our monthly Alabama Work Comp Today, where we try to bring you conversations about news around the country, news in Alabama, those kind of things. And we want to welcome Mike as our guest. Mike's up in New York City. So thank you, Mike, for joining us today. Let me put this on mute and then we should be good to go. Mike, I apologize for a really bad introduction, but if you would tell folks about your firm and about yourself, and then we'll jump into these stories.
No problem. Thanks for having me on today, guys. Having been sheltered in place for the last month, it's always nice to talk to different people. It's amazing how much you miss company and how much you miss socialization these days. So I'm happy to be on. A little bit about my firm and myself. I work for the firm of Pasternack, Tilker, Ziegler, Walsh, Stanton, and Romano here in New York. We handle not only workers' compensation cases, we also handle personal injury cases. We handle Social Security disability cases. We handle municipal pension cases. So we're pretty much a full service law firm for workers who get injured either on the job or off the job. We handle cases throughout the state of New York. I personally practice in Brooklyn. I appear before the Brooklyn Workers' Compensation Board, but we do handle cases throughout the state. A little bit about me personally. I have been practicing as soon as my wife leaves in the background back there. I've taken over her office. She has a home office, which is nice because it's got the fax machine, the copier, everything here. And it may seem unfair since she's a lawyer too, that I've kicked her out of her office, but she has co-opted our entire basement, which is, I guarantee you, far larger than her office. So I'm stuck in a little office. She has the entire basement, which has the kitchen and everything else down there. But anyway, I've been practicing workers' compensation for about 25 years now. I have never had any other job since I have left law school out of Colorado. I have always been practicing on the claimant side, only injured workers. I'm proud to say that I have represented. I have never represented a defense insurance company in my life, and hopefully it'll stay that way. I am a past president of the Workers' Injury Law and Advocacy Group, which is where I met the two of you. I've known David for a couple of years and Bernard, you for a little while now. I'm a past chair of the Brooklyn Bar Association Workers' Compensation Committee, past chair of the AAJ Workers' Compensation Section. I'm a member of a couple of the local New York Workers' Compensation Bar Associations here. So I'm very proud to say that I have been fairly involved in both national and local workers' compensation issues for quite some time now.
Well, we want to thank you for one, being our friend, and two, making some time for us today for this monthly program that we have. And the last time we were together, David and I were with Rojan Chabra, our buddy over in the Jackson, Mississippi area. And believe it or not, David, that was 6 weeks ago. And we are in a whole new world in the last 6 weeks. It was around the 19th of March. Today's the 30th of April, headed into May, and our world is completely different. And
we were just at the start of sheltering in place and staying at home at that point.
We sure were. And there's been many laws that have been passed, not only nationally, federal laws. The president has helped with the Congress, and they have passed, hopefully, laws that help us all. That remains to be seen. A lot of raised eyebrows. And then each state has now implemented either state laws or ordinances for your particular cities. But no one, Mike's up in New York, we're here in Alabama. It's different everywhere. But the commonality of all of this is that we all want to be safe. We all want to be healthy. We all want to do what's reasonable and prudent. And we're going to run through a series of articles here that have made national news over the past month or so, but they affect us all. It doesn't matter what part of the country you're in. It really is, and this is because this show is really focused on employment, employers, employees, gig economy, any type of hire and pay that affects our economy, we're dealing with it or trying to here. And so, David, what are some of the broad issues, before we jump into the article, what are some of the things, and Mike, same question for you, what are some things that you're hearing from your current clients and some of the things that are new callers are calling you about?
Yeah, I'd say that some of the common themes that we've had with these phone calls have been dealing with unemployment. People have been laid off in mass. I mean, we're in the millions upon millions nationwide of people filing for unemployment. Those who are fortunate not to lose their job want to know if they have to go back to work because they're concerned about being in an environment where they can be exposed to COVID-19, and they want to know whether they have to go back to work, and if they don't, whether they can lose their job or whether they're allowed to have pay. So those are two big issues that we've been dealing with and trying to counsel people over the last 6-7 weeks now.
And a lot of what David says is true in New York, obviously, as well. People concerned with safety and people concerned with losing their job. It's interesting that you should have mentioned the gig employment issue in your introduction there, because this has been one of the main issues that has been very extensively discussed over the course of the last several years, not just during the coronavirus outbreak, but also in terms of misclassification of employees as being independent contractors, and also those people who actually choose to be in the gig economy and whether or not they are actually employees. Because a lot of those people are finding that they don't have protections during this time. Whatever protections that actual employees might have are certainly not being extended to any members of the gig economy, which is why that was always such a big issue even before this crisis came about, because it's situations like this that cause a strain on the economy when people who should be rightly classified as employees are not. They lose protections when they most need them, which is certainly potentially in this type of environment.
And Mike, we've done this show every month since September, and every show we've had, we've talked about gig economy, the Uber drivers. It's such a prevalent issue in our world that we're always discussing.
Yeah, I was looking back at our notes from the last 6-7 months, and you're right. That's been one of the constant topics that have been there for each of these episodes. Well, let's kind of jump in now to the first. This one comes out of Philadelphia, and the title of it is "My Employer Says I Have to Go to Work During Coronavirus. What are my rights?" And this, at least for our firm, and I suspect for your firm and for you, Mike, this is an everyday question. I'm on the phone half the day counseling clients about how to deal with this very topic. What are my rights? So what did you guys take away from going through this?
Well, this is the million-dollar question, isn't it? Especially when your rights with respect to coronavirus, your rights to a safe workplace. I mean, these are rights that should be there for any employer at any particular time. You have the right to go to a workplace that have that workplace be a safe work environment. What are my rights when I go to work? That can be, you can list that in many different ways. What protections do I have? What protections do I have when I go to work from contracting the coronavirus? What protective gear does my employer have to provide for me? How often do they have to clean their facilities or the place where I work? You can say, what protections do I have? What protections do I have if I go to work and I contract the coronavirus? What protections do I have if my employer wants me to go to work, and I don't go to work for fear of contracting the coronavirus. I mean, these are all questions as to what rights you have. And with respect to the coronavirus issue specifically, it's been my firm's policy to take every coronavirus case that calls our office, and there have been a ton of them. And we are taking anybody who can reasonably relate their exposure to the coronavirus at work, and we're going to see where it goes. For many of our workers, we represent are in the healthcare industry. So they are really on the front line. They're nurses, they're RNs, they're home healthcare people. They work in nursing homes. So they are at high risk of exposure. Other people, not so much. More fleeting exposures where they believe they've been exposed at work. Who knows? And I think that certainly one of the biggest issues for states' workers' compensation programs at this point with these types of cases is certainly going to be the one of causality. How do you prove that you contracted the coronavirus at work? But with respect to all of these other issues, what are my rights? What are my rights to a safe workplace? I mean, those are rights. Those are laws that are on the book, either on state labor laws or from a federal point of view, the National Labor Relations Act, where you have the right to a safe workplace. This article was talking about the National Labor Relations Act, but they correctly state that bringing a claim under that act is onerous and it's slow. I mean, I know I complain about our workers' compensation system here being slow all the time, but it pales in comparison with the federal case. And they are obviously more difficult to prove as a community type of case as opposed to an individual type of case. But obviously, those are the types of protections that you have. You have your local state's laws that protect you from having an unsafe work environment. And there's also some federal protections there as well.
Dave, what about Alabama's at-will employment laws? What kind of protections, if any, do we have for them?
Yeah, so most employees in Alabama are termed at will, which means that they can be fired for any reason, for no reason, for a good reason, for a dumb reason, for a bad reason. So there's limited protections there for so many of our employees in Alabama. We're not a union state. Very few unions, very few employees are members of unions here in Alabama. Mike, you were talking about safe work environments, and I think probably everybody's following the news has seen chicken and beef processing plants where workers are complaining about unsafe work environments. We've got several chicken processing plants here throughout Alabama, and I've seen where some employees they've had to quit because they don't feel safe. They don't have time to even turn their heads off of away from the conveyor belt to sneeze because the lines are running so fast. And it's just heard some horrible stories coming from employees who are in those chicken and beef and pork processing.
Yeah, one plant alone had an outbreak of diagnosis of 75 employees.
Exactly.
That's just one plant in Alabama. And we
Well,
know you're kind of.
It's also important to note that a lot of the CDC guidelines are just that. They're guidelines as to what type of protections employers have to take. They're not actually laws coming from the federal government. They're guidelines, and it's, as we know as attorneys, it's a big difference between a guideline and an actual law. So it's somewhat flexible as to what protections are mandated at this point.
What about complaining or making a complaint known to OSHA? Does that serve any purpose right now for employees who have concerns or there's an outbreak in their workplace?
Does it make any difference? I would say yes. I would absolutely say that if there's anyone who has a unsafe work environment, that they should tell as many people about it as they can. And again, a lot of these workers do not have protections, and you know, they might not be technically able to be fired if they complain about unsafe work environments, but we all know that employers, when they want to find a way to fire you, will find a way to fire you, and try to do it in a way that protects them from any liability. In a lot of states, OSHA, the OSHA programs throughout the states have sort of been cut back over the last number of years. A lot of states, I don't even think, have OSHA offices in them anymore. So I don't know exactly how, especially with the current political environment and the current administration, I don't know how diligent OSHA would be in coming to investigate plants that the president wants open. The Defense Protection and Production Act that has been talked about a lot recently. We don't need to get into that, but at the end of the day, if the president doesn't want those things investigated, I doubt they will be, unfortunately.
Mike, you mentioned that your firm represents a lot of nurses and healthcare workers. Has New York passed in any way a presumption that those first responders or healthcare workers are, if they contract coronavirus, or that it's presumed they got it at work or contracted it at work?
The answer is not yet. There is a bill pending before the legislature that would create a presumption. I know that many states actually have passed such provisions, but New York is not one of them yet. I don't think it will be too long before we do. I think they will. We would hope, considering that we have a Democratic governor, a Democratic legislature completely, that they would want to protect injured workers. Not saying that Republicans don't, but traditionally more Democratic governments pass more worker-friendly legislation. But not yet is the answer. It's coming. It's in the pipeline.
Yeah, about 3 weeks ago, I'm glad you guys brought it up. Another one of our articles, about 3 weeks ago, Missouri just passed its law that first responders are eligible for work comp due to COVID-19.
Yeah.
And I really think that's such a step in the right direction. I wish every state would jump on board with that, because it's just for the obvious. These are the people who are protecting everyone else. And I don't think it should be just first responders. And I don't know what first responders is limited to, whether it's just people in the medical profession, police, fire, paramedic, the traditional first responders. But what about people who are not in that scenario, but they're still out on what I'll call, or what I've seen called, the front line? People working at grocery stores. What about people who are making deliveries? People who are working at restaurants? At least in Alabama, Mike, we have curbside or delivery pickup for restaurants for the next couple in place, has been for a few weeks and will be for a few more weeks. But what about those people? How and I'll throw this to you guys to talk, is what about people who are not just first responders, but what I'll call frontline workers?
I think that you will get, I think that you will get a lot of pushback from the Business Council and from the insurers on trying to expand presumption bills broadly. In Illinois, their Workers' Compensation Regulatory Committee, I don't know what it's called, just rescinded a regulation that they had made regarding presumptions based upon complaints from the Retailers Association. That was a regulation that was not a law. So they scaled back on that. And a lot of the presumption bills that I have seen that have passed throughout the country are limited to first responders, as you say, the police, fire, EMTs, those types of things. And I think that I agree with you personally. One of the things that we are looking at here in New York is trying to get that presumption to apply at least to anybody who has been deemed to be an essential employee, who would be those workers, those delivery people, delivery drivers in your state, delivery bikers in our state, and grocery clerks, and those types, and the restaurant workers who are still there. But anybody who is deemed to be an essential employee, I think, should have the benefit of a presumption of compensability. So I agree with you. I think that is a very difficult political road, not necessarily a political road to hoe. I think that is a very difficult sell to the business council, because they are looking at the bottom line here, and they're looking at, if there's presumptions for all of these employers and employees, an explosion in cases. As I say, our office has taken in a lot of cases in the last month. And if all of these people are presumed to be entitled to compensation, it's going to cause an increase, significant increase, in not only the amount of the claims, but the amount of payments that an insurance company might have to make out, because you have to remember that this is not just an indemnity benefit, which in these types of cases might not be so great. I mean, in the extreme cases, it can be terrible, in death cases as well. And we've seen, unfortunately, many of those in our office. But if for people who are just supposed to quarantine for a couple of weeks and then they'll be fine, which hopefully is the majority of people, maybe it's not an indemnity issue, but who knows on the medical issue. I mean, we don't know yet what the long-term ramifications of this disease are going to be on a person's health. Are you going to need medical care for an extended period of time? Are you going to need medical treatment and maybe medications, medications for the rest of your life as a result of this? I don't know. I don't know if anybody knows at this particular point. But if I was an insurance company, I would be really, careful as to what presumptions I really wanted in the law for how broad that is. I mean, I'd like it as an injured workers attorney. I would like it as broad as possible, and I think they deserve it. I mean, you're asking these people to go out there and feed us, and to keep our grocery stores open, and to keep our nursing homes open, and to keep our food coming to us because we can't go out and get it. So I think those people should be afforded the maximum protections under the law.
Definitely agree with all of that.
Yeah.
David, do you think that, well, let's get into another one of these articles before we get to that. This is out of Orange County, California. Worker sues, says employer said to interact with public during the coronavirus outbreak. And this is where we're headed with our conversation, because the next one after that is there's a wrongful death lawsuit out of Illinois. And you see where we're going with this, guys who are watching us, is we're trying to share with you what you're thinking. It's the concerns you have as an employee going back into the employment. As an employer, what are my responsibilities? But then what happens? Well, people are diagnosed, and then lawsuits are going to evolve from this. So this one comes out of Orange County, California. Dave, did you take a look at this one?
Yeah, I can give a quick summary. It's kind of ironic. She works as an insurance fraud investigator, kind of on the opposite side of us on cases.
The first thing I saw, David, and I laughed at it. That was
yeah,
ironic indeed.
Ironic. So she's suing her former employer, alleging that she was ordered to work in conditions that put her at risk of contracting the coronavirus, and then she was fired after making a complaint. So interestingly, I don't believe she was ever diagnosed with coronavirus, but she was fearful of being put in that work environment. So the company she sued, her former employer, is called the Fraud Fighters Incorporated, is who she sued.
So much irony there, but go ahead.
Fraud Fighters primarily serves insurance companies' employers in work comp cases, employer liability, disability claims, and employee leave requests. So she investigates injured workers. She does that through surveillance. She does that through investigating them online, looking at their social media accounts. Now, interestingly, she often worked from home, but she often had to look into claims for Reliant Urgent Care in Los Angeles, where she interacted with doctors, medical personnel, and the general public, according to her suit. So this, I think, was filed in late March, early April. She was terminated from her employment because she refused to follow her employer's orders about continuing to work in the field. They said, continue working so long as you're not infected. So that's
Mike, if that case comes in your door in New York, not California, but in New York, how does the law treat that type of a case?
Well, it's really there's a couple things about this. It's a wrongful termination suit. Is really what this case is, and it's a suit that says that it's in violation of the state labor code. And I think one of the key things about this lawsuit, and again, without knowing the full facts of it, just from what I read, I think one of the key things here is that her employer, obviously being a fraud investigation company, was deemed to not be essential personnel. And I think one of the main prongs of her suit will probably be the fact that there was a county, at the very least, a county and city mandated work from home order in place when her employer said that she had to go out into the field and work. So I think that's somewhat a little different than if you were deemed to be an essential employee. So for this particular type of case, I think that a lot of it may hinge on the fact that her employer tried to make her work in direct contravention of a city and county mandated health regulation. And I think if it came into my office, I think that would be the angle that I would probably explore the most. You know, and it's the same thing. It's whether or not my employer, they're also alleging violations of the state labor code. So you'd have to look into whether or not your employer is deliberately putting you at risk and what the standard of proof is in terms of them knowing that there is especially if she's going into a nursing home, which we know are hotbeds of corona infestation, unfortunately, with some of our most vulnerable citizens. What duty the employer has to keep her out of that, and really it's really also what duty they have to accommodate her and not put her in harm's way. So I think I would look serious. I think it would be a viable claim pretty much anywhere if you were in violation of, like, if you came to New York and your employer said, you know, I know we're not an essential company, but you have to come to work every day. And you said no, I think you may have some recourse there.
Dave, that case comes in our door. How's Alabama law going to treat it?
I'm going to get Mike to work with me on it.
Yeah. Unfortunately, in Alabama, we just don't have the protections that a lot of other states have, being an at-will employment state. But if we can show that there was retaliation because she was maintaining a work comp claim, but that has to be the sole reason. Mike, we can pick, if they pick any other legitimate, non-discriminatory reason for the termination, there's no case. And
well, that's what I said to you before, is that employers will find a way to make it not due to your, I mean, we have anti-discrimination claims here in New York as well, and they are very, very, very difficult to prove for the reason that you just mentioned. Yeah. Is that they'll find a reason to terminate you. But this wasn't even coming out of a workers' compensation claim. Right. This was just coming out of a termination, which is an entirely different cause of action.
Well, we're going to keep this one on our radar and circle back to it in the upcoming months and see if there's any further information that's out there. And there may be. I did not look to see who plaintiff's counsel was, if they were a willing member or somebody we might know. Maybe we get that person on the show in the upcoming months if they can talk about it and see how it plays out. But there's going to be lots more cases like this from a termination standpoint in many states, I suspect. Well, if you guys remember in the news, sadly, a Chicago area bus driver who was making his complaints known publicly of his fear of his bus being so toxic, if you will, my term, of the coronavirus, he ultimately succumbed to the disease a few days later. Now that was in the Chicago area. The next article we're going to read about is coincidentally also from Illinois, but it was just so very sad and such a prime example where you have a man who's doing his job as a bus driver for the city of Chicago, makes his complaints known publicly, the problems that he sees and his fears, and then it's reported about 4 days later he succumbed to the disease. And that's just, for me, became a very stark reality, a very in your face reality of what can happen when employees are not protected or when they're exposed. But Mike, let's jump into this Walmart case out of Illinois where the title of the article is Walmart Employee's Family Files Wrongful Death Lawsuit After Man Dies of Coronavirus Complications. And this is the ultimate fear for anybody who's an employee, for their family.
It absolutely is. And the suit arises out of the claim of negligence. And they are claiming, the attorney in that case is claiming that Walmart was negligent in not adequately cleaning their store, enforcing social distancing rules, providing professional equipment, protection equipment to their employees. And it really is sort of disturbing because the suit also claims that Walmart knew that several of their employees were having coronavirus or COVID-like symptoms in the store and still did not take any additional measures to protect their workers who are still coming to work every day. And I think it's fairly telling that one of the things that's mentioned in this article is that subsequent to it wasn't just one of their employees, two of their employees actually died of coronavirus during this time. That's soon after two of their employees died, Walmart's policies on how they were going to maintain their stores changed a little bit, at least according to the article, and that they introduced more stringent distancing measures. They introduced sneeze guards. They introduced reduced hours. They introduced more measures to keep a limited number of people in their stores. So this seems to be, unfortunately for these two employees, a situation of too little, too late. And the question, again, it's similar to the questions that we've been discussing here in context of the other articles that we've discussed, is what is the duty to protect workers? And it just seems that it's unclear. It just seems that it's unclear as how much is enough in terms of protection. At one point, do we value the safety of our employees over profits? It's the age-old question. I mean, it's the question that you guys are facing down in Alabama when you're deciding whether to reopen the state. It's been national news. Michigan's rioting over it. I grew up in Michigan, so I'm talking to all my friends there. You know, they're slightly more conservative than I am, so they have a different take on things. It's very interesting coming from liberal New York, talking to my friends in conservative states about these things. But it's really a question of at what point is there an appropriate trade-off between safety and the ability of companies to function and the abilities of which hamper the company's ability to operate in an effective manner. And again, this is also interesting because it just outlines the variety of types of claims that we've already seen, a number of types of claims that can be made for Corona. We've already seen wrongful termination. We're seeing wrongful death. We're seeing maybe NLRB claims. I read an article recently where they're talking about class action claims. A class action claim has already been filed against the federal government on behalf of some prison employees for coronavirus. A class action suit was filed in Alaska. Again, these are really on government employees, but it could be also applicable to bigger employees who have large facilities in different types of states. Amazon warehouse being one. You think of these things. So just the sheer scope of the number and the different types of claims that can come out of, and that's getting far beyond the field of workers' compensation, which is my obviously specialty. But it's just any labor law issue that you can find, there may be a potential claim here. And the question is to what extent liability will attach.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dave.
I was just going to add, I thought it was interesting that these two men who lost their lives working for Walmart, they're employees of Walmart, but the lawsuit is for wrongful death, negligence. I'd be curious to see how that unfolds, because the exclusive remedy of the workers' compensation laws in most states mean you can't sue your employer in tort. So be curious to see how this shakes out.
Well, one of my notes on this case was I wonder if Walmart will interpose a workers' compensation defense in this case.
Right.
Because I know certainly in New York, if that's the claim that you got it at work, well, it's an interesting situation because, I'm assuming that most workers' compensation systems, at least in this aspect, are similar, that your injury has to arise out of and in the course of your employment. Certainly going to work and being exposed to the coronavirus, your injury arose out of your employment, but was it really in the course of your employment that you contracted this? Was it a part of your job duties that caused you to contract this disease? So there's an interesting angle there. There's also, in New York, I don't know if in other states, there is a section of our workers' compensation law that says if the employer intentionally harms you for an intentional tort, you can take it outside of the workers' compensation system. I don't know if the same exists in Alabama. I know it exists in some other states. That's a little tricky. That's very hard to prove in many instances. But it would be interesting here to see if that would be something that would be argued for the exact same reasons that we talked about with respect to the last article, that the employer knew that they were putting you at risk, and that one of the risks that they put you in danger of is death. So it's an interesting twist. I have my doubts about whether that would fly in New York, but at least it's something, if you really wanted to try to push the wrongful death angle, that I would certainly explore.
Well, one thing we all three can agree on is these cases are going to be filed for the next several years, and this is going to go on for quite a while until there are some definitive definitions in the medical field about how people contract this, the permanency for people who live through this but suffer organ issues or other internal issues. But then that leads us to our last article here, the Amazons of the world, the Walmarts of the world. Despite the new coronavirus law, the article title says, workers at these big companies say they still must work sick or lose pay. And so you've got big companies. Again, they mention Baskin Robbins, Dunkin' Donuts. There's a whole bunch of companies listed in here. The big companies of our country, we need our workers. We need them, despite all of the new Family Medical Leave Act that has come out, the Families First Act overall, and then the different laws that have come under that. Dave, where's the balance? How do folks at home deal with that?
Mike, we talked about earlier that not a month goes by when we do this show that we don't talk about the gig economy. Yeah. Well, we also talk about Amazon because it's,
they've been in every show.
Yeah. I mean, they're up there with Walmart as one of the largest employers in the world. And it's, striking that balance of, yes, we want our food and we want our house supplies and our clothing delivered to us in a day or 48 hours after we order it. But at what cost to the men and women who are working for these companies? That's that delicate balance. Look, I'm a subscriber to Amazon. I love their products I can get in a short amount of time and not have to go into a retail store and potentially expose myself to coronavirus. But we're seeing some horror stories coming out of these warehouses where they literally just people are breaking down because they cannot keep up with the pace that they're required to pull these orders and stock these orders. And it's scary. It really is.
And I think that, and I'm like David, my groceries for the last month have been delivered by Amazon Fresh. They come to my door and leave them on my door. And I use them all the time. But I think what this situation is really making us rediscover as a nation, and it's certainly something that we as workers' compensation attorneys have known for quite some time. It's really redefining who is an essential worker in our economy. Yes, it's doctors. Yes, it's lawyers. Yes, it's police and fire department. But it's also, as we've already talked about today, the grocery clerks, the delivery drivers, the fast food workers, people doing jobs that other people might say, and I'm sure you've heard it because I've heard it in my practice. What do you want me to go work at McDonald's? I've heard it. And it's kind of ironic now that those are the people who are keeping us fed. And these are people, the service industry people, the people who are deemed now to be essential employees are those who are in some of the lowest paying jobs in our economy. The most prevalent minimum wage jobs are people, quite contradictorily, who are deemed to be essential workers. And these are also people who are the least protected for the safety of their jobs should they stop working. The expanded, you touched on it, the Expanded Family Medical Leave Act that was passed, it doesn't apply to employers that have less than 50 employees. It doesn't apply to employers that have more than 500 employees. So the Amazons of the world and the McDonald's of the world and the Hobby Lobbies of the world, they're not covered. Their employees are not covered. And what happens when they're not covered? That means that they decide really what their Family Medical Leave Act compliance should be, or how much family medical leave, if any, paid medical leave anybody gets. And that's, a lot of those policies are detailed in this article, and it's really quite disgraceful. And these types of people are also the people who have the least protections when they get fired from their jobs. They don't stop work despite their being not forced, but despite their being asked, shall we say, to go work in conditions that they know are dangerous. They go because they simply cannot stop working. They cannot afford to go to work or to stop working financially. And they cannot afford to go and not get paid because then they'll get fired, and they may not, with the millions of people who are now applying for unemployment benefits, we know that it may be difficult to find a job out there. So if these people get terminated from their job, they may not be able to find another job. And it's interesting that we keep seeing, and this is for anybody who's been involved in national workers' compensation the way you and I have, it's not surprising to see the same names come up over and over and over. Walmart, Dillard's, Hobby Lobby. These are employers that have traditionally been very, very difficult to deal with for injured workers. And they try to do as much as they can to limit any liability, both in a workers' compensation and in a tort perspective. And we've known that for a number of years. So it is really, really not surprising to see their names prominently mentioned in these articles.
You know, it's on another program today. I had a discussion with a restaurant owner, and I asked him, "What are you guys doing that when our tiered, when our state has this tiered opening of society, and the next tier begins May 15th in a little over 2 weeks? How are you going to give confidence to the public? It's okay to come in. This is an environment where you're going to be okay in the public." We just had a comment from Miss Kitty 729. She works, I assume she works at a mall and is scared to go back right now because you can't social distance at a mall.
Yeah.
And that comment right there hits exactly on point for anybody going out into the public. How do you have any confidence, even when your state says you can go do these types of things, you can go to the beach, whatever, but you got to have social distance, you got less than 10 people, whatever it may be? How do you put that confidence back in people? And I think that is so difficult for big employers, small employers. It doesn't matter who you are. You're dealing with the public.
People need to get comfortable wearing masks.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right.
It's going to be difficult. It really is. And I heard New Jersey was opening up their parks soon. And when our governor and our mayor, I don't think it's any secret that they don't like each other.
Yeah. Really? We hadn't heard that.
I hadn't noticed.
Well, that's why I said I don't think I'm breaking any news there. In a couple in the beginning of March, mid-March, when this was first happening, and the mayor was telling us that the parks are going to remain open. It's like, but everyone should stay 6 feet apart. I mean, if you've ever been to a park in your life,
really?
Park right across the street from my house, there's no way that anybody's going to voluntarily do that. But at the same point, it's the same balancing act that we talked about before. I mean, God knows we can't stay inside forever. Or Lord, I hope we can't, because either my wife or I or my children are going to end up dead, one or the other. I'm not sure. My son is perfectly fine with this. He's 17 years old. He's been plugged into his computer for months now. He was way ahead of the social distancing curve. So
David's are on the way at 13 and 11.
Yeah. You just mentioned, was it New Jersey's opening their parks?
Yeah.
California is now closing theirs. It's so inconsistent.
And I don't think they have for their population per capita, I don't think California has near the cases that, of course, New York, but many other states on the eastern side of the country has per capita. So there's no rhyme or reason at some point or another for you to draw reason to it.
Yeah, and when you say opening parks, like if you say in New York you're opening the park, that means you're opening every park from the size of the park in my school that's across the street to Central Park. I mean, there's a big difference in what you consider to be a park. So I guess, I have my problems with a lot of politicians. I have a lot, Governor Cuomo has been great in this. I've had my issues with what he's done for our workers' compensation system over the years. And I still don't forgive him for a lot of those things. But from a perspective of the coronavirus thing, and really all politicians, there's really no right answer here, quite honestly. There's no playbook for this. And that's no matter what the politicians do, they're going to get grief for it. It's either going to be too soon, it's going to be too late. If there was an easy answer, I'm sure they would have come up with it, but there's not. I just tend to err on the side of caution, quite honestly, rather than opening too soon. I'd rather open too late than too soon, quite honestly.
Well, guys, we're pushing at about 50 minutes into our show. Ordinarily, Mike, we would contrast and compare your home state's work comp, certain aspects of your state's laws and procedures with ours, but I think we're gonna forego that because we've concentrated exclusively on the coronavirus pandemic and how people in the laws are coming together, and we're just trying to figure these things out. So I want to take just a couple of minutes, guys, before we wrap up. I want to talk about, and we'll start with you, Dave, we get calls just like Mike and his firm get calls every single day. People are looking for answers. People want to know that's the stress part of our job. Or what we hope to do is take away a little bit of that stress by providing answers or letting our potential clients or current clients know we're going to go get those answers for you. This lets you put your head on your pillow at night and hopefully have a decent night's sleep as opposed to all that stress. So here's my question to you, Dave, and for you, Mike. You get a brand new phone call, doesn't matter what it is, but it's COVID related. And the caller says, I work at so-and-so company. I don't have the virus. I don't have any symptoms. I'm scared to go back to work. My employer says I need to come back to work. Are there any certain questions that they should be asking or talking with their employer about so that they feel comfortable about going back into the workforce?
Yeah, first thought is what kind of PPE the employer will provide them. There was a personal protective equipment, whether it's gloves or masks. How often is the business cleaned? How is it cleaned? Those are a couple of things that come to mind. And then can the business, depending upon what the business is, are they allowing or reducing the number of people that can enter the business? Are they socially distant in the business, creating alleys or lanes that people are supposed to stay in? So those are some of the things that come to mind.
So just touching on your first statement, Bernard, I don't know everything about Alabama workers' compensation, but I can guarantee you my benefits in New York are better than yours in Alabama. I don't think there's many states that can say that would be worse, quite honestly. But
ding 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 ding.
So, David hit it right on the head. I mean, those are really the three things that you would say to a person who made that phone call to you. What kind of protection am I given? What kind of crowd situation, and this is going to vary depending upon the type of industry that they're in. I mean, it could be if you knew what type of industry that they were in, you could suggest some things that they might look into with their employer as well. I mean, if you're like most clients that I have, your clients are not going to be in the position to, make demands of their employer and say, I'm not coming back unless you do this. But you tell them you have to take care of yourself. Your health is the most important thing. And again, it goes back to the same thing that we were talking about is you can tell them this all you like, but it doesn't matter. In a lot of these instances, it doesn't matter what protections their employers have. If they have to go back, they have to go back. And I see this in other workers' compensation contexts as well. I mean, how many times have I had clients who've been disabled and who have not been able to work, and their doctors are telling them not to work, and they force themselves to go back to work in an unsafe manner because they just can't afford to stay out of work any longer. But it's certainly, I would tell them to find out what kind of distancing measures are in place. Again, the protection. I mean, even a homemade mask is better than no mask at all, according to what I know. So my wife sews masks. So, I've been fortunate to have an endless supply of masks of all different varieties here. And she's supplied masks to all my family and a lot of my friends. But, what is the employer going to provide, or what can I wear? Can I, even if you don't provide it, can I wear it? Can I wear gloves? Can I wear a mask that I bring myself? What you don't want is employers saying, I don't want you wearing a mask because I don't want my customers to be scared to come into the store. And unfortunately, I think that's an answer that a lot of employers will give. If they're told that they can reopen, they're unfortunately going to give that answer to a lot of injured workers. And then you make sure to tell them that if anything bad happens, you're here for them to help them, is really how you end it, I think.
Yeah, and it's, just by having a conversation, by not keeping your mouth closed on this issue, when you're an employee who's been home for a while and you're being called back to work, have this conversation. Because if you don't, you're going back into an environment that you're unaware of, you're scared, and your productivity, your safety may be at other safety may be at issue. But gosh, we could talk about this for the next hours and still not come up with any answers. But we've at least covered a lot of topics that I think a lot of people are going to find to be important enough to hopefully adhere to and listen to. So I want to thank you, Mike, for spending some time. Thank your wife for giving up the office or allowing you to use her office for this hour. We really appreciate your time, your expertise, and your input today.
No problem. I know that when you first asked me to do this, and I couldn't do it a couple months ago, we were way before all of this coronavirus thing. So maybe someday I'll come back on when we have something a little more cheerful to talk about. Although, a lot of times in workers' compensation nationally, there's not a lot of cheerful stuff to talk about. But this is certainly interesting.
It is. So I want to thank you, David. I want to thank you for your time today and your input as always. Guys, the last Thursday of the month, we try to come to you on Alabama Work Comp Today. We bring in a friend from another part of the country who does similar work that we do. We talk about the national issues, the headlines, and when we have time, we compare our state's laws and certain topics dealing with work comp with their state. But today was strictly straight up coronavirus issues, and there was so much to cover here. So thank you all for watching this live. Thank you for if you watch us later on. Please be safe, do the right thing. If you have questions, Mike, how can folks in the New York area reach out to you?
They can reach out to us. They can find us on the internet. Our website is www.workerslaw.com is probably the easiest way that they can find us. Or they can call us. They can find our number on the internet.
And I'll put a link to your firm's website in the notes here so folks can just click on that as well. Dave, how can people reach out to you?
Same way, nomberglaw.com. Start there. Get on the internet, nomberglaw.com, and we're on all the social media platforms: Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube. If you have questions and can't get us at 1 a.m, but you got questions about work comp or coronavirus, jump on our YouTube website, our YouTube link, and we've got lots of videos there that will address your questions.
We actually have almost 40 videos now that address all different topics and areas of society, because I've been doing these different discussions twice a week with restaurant owners, with doctors, with pet adoption people, immigration lawyers, all different topics twice a week. And they're all on our YouTube channel and nomberglaw.com. But Mike, thanks again. Be safe. And we hope to break bread with you again in person sometime in the upcoming months.
I certainly hope so. Thank you guys for having me on today. I appreciate it. Good to see you both.
Take care.